A nuclear bomb has just exploded in Times Square, New York City, causing unimaginable destruction. The massive explosion instantly wipes out buildings and vaporizes millions of people. Everything in the immediate blast zone is reduced to nothing. Miraculously, you survive, but what happens next could be even worse. The deadly radiation from the bomb has now entered your body, and its effects can be devastating. You might not realize it, but radiation is something you encounter every day. Small amounts are present when you walk outside, watch TV, or even eat a banana. However, this type of radiation is harmless because it's very weak. The radiation from a nuclear explosion, on the other hand, is extremely intense and can cause serious harm. Radiation is measured in units called sieverts, SV, or REM, which tell us how much radiation is absorbed and how dangerous it is. On average, a person absorbs about 0.62 REM of radiation per year from natural sources. But after a nuclear explosion, the radiation levels would be much, much higher. Imagine you're standing in the middle of Times Square, about 1 kilometer, 0.6 miles, from the explosion. You would first see a blinding flash of light before being hit by an intense wave of heat and pressure. At that moment, your body would absorb between 300 and 1,000 REM of radiation, the equivalent of eating 30,000 to 100,000 bananas in one go. This level of radiation is far beyond anything humans normally experience. Exposure to this much radiation would cause immediate and severe damage. The intense heat and radiation would harm your body almost instantly. But if you somehow survived the blast, the danger wouldn't be over. Things would quickly get much worse. Let's say you were near Bryant Park, close to the explosion site. The radiation levels there would be between 800 and 1,000 REM, enough to kill instantly. But if you managed to take cover, like inside the New York Public Library, survival would still be nearly impossible. The explosion would destroy the building, glass would shatter and cut through your skin, fires would break out, and radiation levels would remain dangerously high. Even if you managed to survive the blast and destruction, the radiation inside your body would start causing severe internal damage. It would be like a bomb going off inside your cells and tissues, affecting every part of your body. Within hours, you'd start experiencing nausea, vomiting, headaches, and fever because the radiation disrupts brain functions. As time passes, the situation would become even worse. You'd develop acute radiation syndrome, ARS, leading to severe diarrhea as radiation destroys the cells in your intestines. If the damage is severe, death could occur within 10 to 20 days. The radiation would also attack your bone marrow, which produces platelets that help your blood clot. Without them, you'd start bleeding uncontrollably, another deadly consequence of radiation exposure. For men, radiation can also cause temporary infertility by damaging the cells responsible for sperm production. One of the most visible effects of radiation would be hair loss, as the radiation destroys hair follicles, making it impossible for new hair to grow. If you were in the direct impact zone, like Times Square, your chances of survival would be very low, likely below 50%. Even if you escaped the immediate blast, the radiation would continue to damage your body, affecting your organs, tissues, and cells. Without urgent medical treatment, survival would be nearly impossible. In the end, the explosion itself might not be the worst part. The radiation, injuries, and sickness that follow would be even more terrifying, making survival extremely unlikely. If your bone marrow stops working, your body won't be able to produce enough blood cells. This would lead to severe bleeding, frequent infections, and a weakened immune system. Fighting off even minor illnesses would become almost impossible, and the effects of radiation would only make things worse. If you were outside the main blast zone of a nuclear explosion, you would receive a lower radiation dose, around 10 to 20 REM. While this might seem less harmful, it could still have serious long-term effects. Within 2 to 8 years, you could develop leukemia. In fact, people exposed to high radiation levels have a 50% greater risk of getting leukemia compared to those who weren't exposed. Even if leukemia doesn't develop, the risk of other cancers would remain high for the rest of your life. A 100 REM exposure increases the chance of developing cancer by 50%, affecting organs like the stomach, lungs, and liver. There's also a higher risk of chronic liver disease, high blood pressure, and heart problems. Despite these dangers, treatments exist for people exposed to high levels of radiation. Doctors first assess the radiation dose by monitoring symptoms like vomiting. Faster onset means a higher dose. Blood tests check white blood cell counts, which indicate bone marrow damage. The first step in treatment is decontamination, which involves removing contaminated clothing and washing the skin with soap and water to get rid of radioactive particles. If the bone marrow is damaged, medications can help stimulate white blood cell production, and in severe cases, blood transfusions may be needed. Depending on the type of exposure, additional treatments may be required to support organ recovery. Radiation exposure isn't limited to nuclear explosions. One of the worst nuclear disasters in history occurred on April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. This accident released 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The exposure was equivalent to eating 6 trillion bananas. Within 3 months, 28 plant workers died from radiation exposure, while about 140 others suffered from acute radiation sickness. Many of the 600 workers who survived the initial explosion later developed leukemia and other radiation-related illnesses. People living in nearby areas were also affected. Wind carried radioactive particles into the air, contaminating the environment. While most residents received only low levels of radiation, similar to the amount from a CT scan, some were exposed to much higher doses. One major risk came from drinking contaminated milk. Cows that grazed on radioactive grass produced radioactive milk, which significantly increased the risk of thyroid cancer for those who consumed it. Due to dangerous radiation levels, authorities evacuated the area and established a 30-kilometer, 19-mile, exclusion zone. The city of Pripyat, once home to thousands, became a ghost town. Over time, radiation levels in Chernobyl have decreased. Radioactive particles lose energy and become more stable, reducing the radiation they emit. Today, short visits to the exclusion zone are possible with minimal risk. A 2-week stay would expose a person to about 3 to 4 rem of radiation, but staying for a full year could result in dangerous exposure up to 90 rem. Even during short visits, some areas remain extremely radioactive. One of the most dangerous spots is the Elephant's Foot, a mass of melted nuclear fuel and reactor material in the basement of the reactor building. When the disaster first occurred, standing near it for just 5 minutes would have been fatal. Even today, it remains highly dangerous and will continue to pose a threat for decades, if not centuries. To protect visitors, the entire reactor has been enclosed in a massive containment structure. Now, imagine a completely different scenario, one that takes place far beyond Earth. It's the year 2042, and you are part of the first human mission to Mars. While the journey is thrilling, one of the biggest challenges is radiation exposure. Unlike Earth, Mars has no magnetic field to shield it from space radiation. The planet also lost most of its atmosphere due to strong solar winds. As a result, radiation levels on Mars are 40 to 50 times higher than those on Earth. Scientists don't yet fully understand the long-term effects of space radiation. However, based on studies on Earth, prolonged exposure could cause acute radiation sickness. Just 10 rem of exposure increases cancer risk. Radiation can also damage DNA, leading to genetic mutations and accelerated aging, which could shorten life expectancy over time. One of the most serious threats occurs every 11 years when the Sun reaches a phase called solar maximum. During this period, powerful solar flares and coronal mass ejections release massive amounts of radiation. Without proper protection, a person on Mars could be exposed to around 3,000 rem, a dose that would be instantly fatal. To survive, astronauts would need protective suits and secure shelter, such as underground lava tubes, which could provide natural radiation shielding. Radiation is just one of the many dangers humans will have to overcome for long-term survival on Mars.